Well, from Zagreb to Rome, from Rotterdam to Brussels, tens of thousands of people are protesting against vaccine mandates and COVID restrictions as governments clamp down in response to another surge in infections. The biggest demonstrations have been in Austria, which stands alone in the European Union in making vaccinations mandatory for everyone. And that's giving oxygen to far-right and extremist groups infiltrating the protests across Europe. Daniel Jolly is a senior lecturer in psychology at Britain's Northumbria University and an expert in conspiracy theories. Daniel Jolly, welcome to Breakfast.
Good morning. Hi.
Why do you think we're seeing so many people take to the streets in almost every European capital against COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns? Is it just COVID fatigue or is something else at play?
It's such an important question. I think it's worth noting that these people, it's a very diverse, complex mix of people. So you may be people there who are more concerned citizens who are asking questions about vaccination, all the way to those who are anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists who believe that the vaccine success is being hidden, or what should I say, the effects are being hidden for profit, all the way up to, as you mentioned there, far-right extremists. And actually, it's been found that anti-vaccine conspiracy theories are present on both sides of the political spectrum. But the far right have really pounced on these ideas. So, for example, very much suggesting a new world order, which is the suggestion that there's a secret group of powerful elites planning global domination. So this could actually be really appealing for some people who are drawn into these narratives.
How? I mean, it's easy for all of us to say, because we're having the same debate here in Australia to some degree, easy to say that far-right groups are infiltrating these protests. As you say, the protests are a mixed bag of people. A lot of people just scared of vaccine. A lot of people, it's been a tough, couple of years, and they're sick of not being able to live their lives as they want to. But, is there proof of far-right groups taking advantage of COVID fatigue and anti-vax sentiment in an organised way? What's the proof we know beyond the few signs at the protests?
So looking at online communities to see the rhetoric that is being used, and indeed people who are drawn in general to conspiracy theories are those who feel disempowered, they feel anxious, they're trying to understand the world around us. So by very much suggesting the idea that there's a powerful elite trying to plant something, and that is the reason of COVID-19, that's why vaccines are being pushed and restrictions, for these people it'd be very appealing. So indeed, online, on different spaces, this rhetoric is being pounced upon. And, for that individual, this actually would then explain what the world is going on. And indeed, people try and people try and make sense of this complex world. So someone will find that idea particularly appealing. And indeed, with these protests, although I have no data on this, I suspect it's very empowering, even more so for someone who feels vulnerable outside, very much powerless. So I imagine actually feeling part of a community of what they see to be like-minded people to be actually a real positive thing. Of course, they are protesting something that actually is based in misinformation and is just obviously not true.
Austria has seen some of the most ferocious protests after the government imposed a nationwide lockdown and then imposed mandatory vaccinations across the population. It's also got one of the lowest vaccination rates in Europe, only 64% fully vaccinated yet of the adult population. How much of that scepticism about vaccines is linked, do you think, to Austria's powerful far-right Freedom Party and its anti-vaccination stance? Is there a link? Because Austria by no means is the only European country with double vax rates in the 60s.
That is a good question. Something that actually I don't know the answer to. As I mentioned so far, these rhetorics do kind of go hand in hand. So I would certainly, at least theoretically, assume those are linked. But I think it's a good question to try and understand how these things are interacting. Because, of course, as we know in general, it's being capitalised by this kind of movement as a way to push through ideas. And for people who find these ideas really appealing, it kind of sticks. But how it actually, the role it's playing in that particular context, I think is an important question, which I don't know the answer to.
I mean, the stakes are really high. Over the weekend in the Netherlands, the Dutch police opened fire on protesters. People were injured by that police fire. I mean, that kind of action by police is going to lose support, isn't it? This is very tricky for governments to balance.
It is so tricky. And of course, For someone who believes in these conspiracies, these narratives, they are motivated to call out those who they perceive to be conspiring. And indeed, we've demonstrated in data that these beliefs can actually make you feel more angry, and this anger can then try and motivate you to go out and engage in violent protest. So actually, these behaviours are things that we're seeing time and time again. And actually, throughout the COVID pandemic, there's been many examples of this occurring. And of course, recently, it's come back into fashion because of obviously the new restrictions. So it is a very balancing act of trying to maintain order but still have that trust. But then again, people who believe in these narratives, that trust arguably is already broken. So potentially it's other things we need to do to try and build that trust again.
Yeah, I mean, talking about trust, Austria's Interior Minister has warned that the protest scene is radicalising, many dismissing the dangers of the virus as a government-led hoax. Now, the issue there is, why would people believe the government is going to, pull a hoax on them and not be truthful about the pandemic? Does it go to just diminished levels of trust? And is there a correlation, do you think, between declining trust in governments and the low vaccination rates in, Austria we've mentioned already, but Germany too, for instance?
Absolutely, because we mentioned there, trust is a real key construct in the sense of trust in institutions and trust in what they are recommending. And indeed, it's looking around and seeing what others are doing, others who we see to be similar to us. And we found that actually those who I perceive to be similar impacts what I believe as well. So if I think my friends also believe in anti-vaccine conspiracies, then that impacts what I believe as well. But we actually have found that if we can correct that misperception and say, actually, not as many people believe in anti-vaccine conspiracies as you think, that can actually decrease your own belief in conspiracies and increase intentions to vaccinate. So potentially it's also around trust, but also social norms as well.
Is there, could extremist movements, do you think, gain more support as the economic fallout from the pandemic deepens? I mean, most countries, the lockdowns have, wreaked havoc with the national budgets. There's deep deficits for years to come. There's high unemployment in many countries. And we've already seen these links in the past. We saw the Yellow Vest protests in Paris. Do you think there's likely to be more trouble ahead with extremist movements capitalising on that kind of disenfranchisement?
I would say definitely yes, because of course, you mentioned job losses. This leads into that frustration, that feeling of powerlessness. And these needs, these motives can be addressed by believing in conspiracy theories, because it makes sense of why this has happened to you. Then again, that you then feel angry, you want to go out and call out the conspirators. So absolutely, these things are all interlinked. So I definitely think this is just very much the start of the iceberg in a way.
Are there outside influences in terms of, I'm thinking perhaps government influences of fanning these protests, Russian bots, or is there any of those elements here?
I certainly haven't seen any evidence of that, but again, it goes back to trying to capitalise on these ideas, and where you've got an audience that are potentially quite susceptible to actively be thinking like in this way, i.e. they're concerned about COVID, they feel powerless, and if you suggest it's a government elite and it's all a way to dominate the world, that'd be quite appealing. So I imagine all these things are interlinked in the online world.
Daniel Jolly, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Daniel Jolly is a senior lecturer in psychology at Britain's Northumbria University.